Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the Bee's Knees by the Big Cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 6, Day 2. But first, let's do our daily punishment. Coffee had a rough time in our house. It gets mugged every single morning. Mug. Key terms for today are Jacob Riis, Ida Tarbell, David Phillips, Robert La Follette, Lochner v. New York, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, Mueller v. Oregon, Newlands Reclamation Act, the Antiquities Act, William Howard Taft, Eugene Debs, the Ballinger-Pinchot Affair, the Square Deal, the 17th Amendment, 18th Amendment, Florence Kelley, the Three C's, the Coal Mine Strike of 1902, TR, Muckraker, Upton Sinclair, Payne-Aldrich Tariff, the Progressive Party, New Nationalism, New Freedom, Woodrow Wilson. There we go. We're going to go over the causes and effects of reform. This is the Progressive era. They're trying to fix some of the problems left over from the Gilded Age, a lot of the domestic problems. We're going to talk about some of the major muckrakers and their impact on America. We're going to talk about TR's corporation policy and his domestic policy, female involvement during the Progressive era, TR's consumer and conservation policies. TR has the 3 C's, and the significance of Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. And we'll talk about William Howard Taft, who becomes president after him, and the impact of the election of 1912. So muckrakers. Muckrakers were reporters, newspapermen, journalists that tried to expose the ills of society. This was actually given to them as a negative name by Theodore Roosevelt because all they focused on is the muck in society. But they did a lot of good, and TR actually became friends with some of them. Here are some of the famous muckrakers that are going to start exposing some of the problems in American society. Jacob Riis. He wrote a book, and most of the book was photographs. It showed the dirt, disease, and poverty of the New York City slums. It's going to lead to some laws being passed in New York City for housing conditions, for aid for the poor, and for stuff like that. Ida Tarbell, her father owned a small oil company, and he was bought out by John D. Rockefeller and some of his corrupt, dirty dealings. She's going to expose all the illegal things Standard Oil does. She's going to assail the practice of life insurance companies, tariff lobbies, and railroad barons as well. But she's most famous for going after Standard Oil, which was the biggest company in America. David G. Phillips is going to expose the political corruption of a lot of the senators. He says 75 out of the 90 senators represented railroad barons in the railroad industry. These are some of the pictures from How the Other Half Lives. Just kind of exposing America to the poverty that was existing in the country. So let's talk about some of the other problems. There was abuse of child labor. There wasn't any national law yet to limit child labor. There were some state laws, but not national laws. There was a big problem with African Americans' illiteracy. 90% of African Americans were illiterate. Plessy v. Ferguson said schools were supposed to be separate but equal, but they definitely were not equal. The African American thing will not really be taken care of. The progressives, some of them were racist, some of the progressives were not racist, but the progressives are mostly middle class, so they're going to be focusing on middle class problems. Some of the big things the progressives wanted is they wanted direct elections of senators. If you remember, before this, the state legislators chose the senators, but they wanted direct election of senators, which will be passed in the 17th Amendment. The 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendment are all known as the Progressive Amendments. They're all progressive reforms. They also want initiatives so people can propose legislation. That's going to be a thing that a lot of states create. They want recalls where you can recall a mayor or a governor if they're being corrupt. They wanted referendums also where you could vote on a law. The people have to do it. They really want more local involvement in democracy. Some states will start to pass laws limiting campaign contributions. One of the most famous progressives was Robert La Follette Sr. He was the governor of Wisconsin, he was a Republican, but almost like a socialist Republican. Pretty interesting. TR is going to be a progressive also. So this is before the Republicans became super conservative. There was like division within the party. He's going to, he wanted to take control from crooked corporations and give it back to the people. He wanted to break the boss politics in Wisconsin. Let's talk about some of the progressive women. Women's suffrage will become a bigger issue, although women will not get the right to vote until World War I, which we'll talk about next video in 1919. But you're going to start to see more women advocating for suffrage. Women will become active involvement in the settlement houses, like Florence Kelley. They'll create something called the Children's Bureau, the Women's Bureau. These will eventually become the governmental agency, the Department of Labor. Florence Kelley will become the Illinois factory inspector. And the person that actually did the settlement houses was Jane Addams, not Florence Kelley. There will be a Supreme Court case, which was actually a victory for women at the time. This actually protected women because of their weaker bodies, like physically. They had, women have like weaker muscles and stuff. So it gave them like certain protections in the job. This was considered a victory by women, but some women thought this inherently put them in a place of inequality in the law. So a few women will be against Muley v. Oregon, but at the time it was considered a progressive victory for women because it's given them more protection. Lochner v. New York is going to be kind of an anti-progressive law Supreme Court case. It's going to go against the progressives. This is going to invalidate the 10-hour workday. This will be a victory for big business. In 1911, we'll have the United States will have the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York. This was really bad. 146 people were killed. What would happen is overnight, women would work in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. It was a textile factory. They were making clothing and stuff. Their boss would lock them in so they couldn't escape. They couldn't have a cigarette break or anything. It was really bad conditions. So they were locked in. A fire started. They tried to get out. Oh no, we can't get out. There was no kind of like things to get rid of the fire. There was no fire extinguishers or anything. So they just all burned to death. Or they tried to jump from the 5th, 6th floor and they died from jumping. By 1917, 30 states started to provide insurance to workers injured in industrial accidents. So the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire will start leading states to start providing workers' compensation and better working conditions. In 1919, also during World War I, we'll have another progressive amendment, the 18th Amendment, which will stop the sale of alcohol. And the 19th Amendment is women's suffrage. This is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Ooh. Yeah, so they were locked in, so you burn to death or you jump. Nope. Let's talk about TR's policy. He's going to do something called the Square Deal. He wanted to give a fair deal to all Americans, both business and labor. He wanted to be neutral. He's going to focus on 3 C's. He wants to control the corporations, he wasn't necessarily anti-monopoly, but he was against monopolies that were against the American interest. He wanted to protect consumers, and he wanted to conserve natural resources. So, let's start with the corporations. In 1902, there was a coal mine strike. Every single time before in American history, the government took the side of big business. TR is going to use his big stick diplomacy. He's going to threaten both the factory workers and the mine owner. He's going to say, listen, guys, you need to come to a compromise or I'm going to nationalize this mine so you no longer own it, business people. We're going to nationalize it. The government will now own this mine. And you labor workers, if you don't come to a compromise, I'm going to draft you all into the army. So really harsh, but he actually got them to compromise. A 10% pay increase and 9-hour workday. The Interstate Commerce Commission we talked about before, it wasn't working well. It wasn't really enforced, and it didn't really have enforcement powers. So TR is going to start doing some stuff for the railroads. Under him, Congress will pass the Elkins Act, which will regulate railroads and ban rebates. Railroads couldn't give rebates to their favorite companies. And the Hepburn Act, which will actually set rates for how much railroads could charge. You should know this about TR right here. He was a trust buster. He did bust trusts, but he was okay with some monopolies. Like, he had a difference between good trust and bad trust. If a trust like went along with what TR said and didn't try to exploit the poor, he let them be. But if he thought they were being exploitative, then he would try to bust them and break up the monopoly. And he did bust some monopolies. However, his president that comes after him, William Howard Taft, will bust more trust than TR will. And this is a political cartoon about railroads. Let's talk about TR's consumerism. The consumers are kind of getting screwed over during this time. There was no sanitation laws. There was no ways to see what was in the products you were buying. Nowadays, you have those. You can look at like my Monster I'm drinking right now, and you can see what the nutritional facts are. They didn't have that back then. If you in a meat packing factory nowadays, we have inspectors to make sure they're being sanitary. They didn't have that back then. One of the big muckrakers, his name was Upton Sinclair. He wrote a book called The Jungle. This was meant to be a socialist tract to show like the poor and how they're being exploited and like kind of push for socialism. But the major character in The Jungle, Jurgis, worked in a meat factory, and it showed the terrible conditions in the meat factory, and it grossed Americans out. He was aiming for the heart of Americans, but he hit the stomach. So Americans are going to want more, there to be more laws limiting and seeing for meat inspection to make sure that you're not eating like that you're not eating like dead rats. In the book, there's a couple like pretty graphic scenes. In one scene, a guy fell into a larder, and like if they would have like had to dump all the meat out, that would have been a waste of money. So they just still served it with a dead guy's body in there. Bad times. In another scene, in a meat factory, they would have wood chips on the ground. The wood chips would prevent you from falling because there'd be blood on the ground and stuff. What a lot of meat factories would do is with the wood chips, meat would fall on the ground at the end of the day, and that would attract rats. So they'd also put poison pellets there. And then at the end of the day, they would like take up, shovel up all like the wood pellets, the dead rats, and the meat, because you don't want to waste the meat, and they would put it back in the meat thing. And that obviously grossed people out. So because of this book and because of some consumer advocacy, Congress will pass the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, which will allow them to monitor how meat is made. There's like the government could send an inspector there to make sure it's sanitary. And the Pure Food and Drug Act, which makes you have to label what you're selling. You can't just sell whatever and say like this will cure cancer. The government could actually inspect it and make sure that what you're saying about it is actually accurate. And these are two still laws that are used today by the federal government. Here's a meat factory. Yay. Conservation. TR was not against like cutting down trees, but he wanted to use the land intelligently and not wastefully. He is going to set aside 125 million acres of land in federal reserves. He's going to create 5 national parks. He's going to do 2 conservation laws. The first one was called the Newlands Reclamation Act. The Antiquities Act is going to provide protection for historical places in America and natural nature reserves. It's going to be the first law that really protects those kind of things. So it's going to provide protection for natural and cultural resources. They use the Antiquities Acts to protect some Native American land, also to protect some national parks, stuff like that. The Newland Reclamation Act is the government will sell some land, which kind of seems counterintuitive, but they use that money to create irrigation projects to eventually grow more trees. So both of these were conservationist laws to conserve the environment. But it wasn't like straight up hippie. It wasn't just like, oh, let's just protect the environment for the environment's sake. Here's TR the conservationist. He's in California here by the redwoods. And here's another one of him after he was president. All right. So in 1908, after serving as president for like 7 years, TR is going to choose William Howard Taft as his successor. The Democrats will nominate William Jennings Bryan again. This is like the 3rd time he's ran. The Socialists will nominate Eugene Debs, who we talked about before. He used to be a Democrat and a labor advocate. TR is going to enlarge the power of the presidency. He helped shape the progressive movement. He's the grandfather of the New Deal. And he also showed that the U.S., that they shared the world with other nations, and he's going to be an imperialist. And in the election of 1908, Taft is going to win. However, here's one of the big problems. TR thought that when he was doing this, he was giving, like he's leaving the presidency, see somebody's carrying his big stick, and he's going to go like hunting for elephants and stuff. And he just thought Taft was going to do what he wanted him to do. Follow my policies, Taft. Be a good maid. But Taft wants to be an independent person, so this will cause problems. So let's talk about Taft the Troubled. William Howard Taft, not as dashing as TR, he was a mild progressive. He was a lawyer. So even though like TR picked and chose which monopolies to go after, which trusts to go after, Taft would go after all of them during this time. There were a lot of revolutions in the Caribbean. America is going to invest money in Honduras and Haiti to keep them out of foreign funds. America under Taft is going to start sending money and supporting businesses in foreign countries. This is called dollar diplomacy. The policy of TR was gunboat diplomacy. Taft is dollar diplomacy. Taft will bust more trust than TR. Under Taft, the Supreme Court will order the breakup of Standard Oil. He is going to be as big of a conservationist as TR, so you would think that TR would like him. But he's going to do some things that TR is going to be upset about. First of all, he went after all the trust, and TR had his good trust versus bad trust thing, so that upset TR. Also, there was something called the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which he will support. So even though Taft was a Republican, progressives in general wanted smaller tariffs. He's going to ask for a smaller tariff, and Congress is going to pass the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which was really not that much smaller at all. And Taft is going to really sign it. So this is going to upset a lot of progressives at Taft. The Ballinger-Pinchot affair is a little bit more complicated. The Secretary of the Interior was Ballinger. He was appointed by William Howard Taft. Pinchot was the U.S. Forest Chief. He was a personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt, and he was a big-time conservationist. What happened was a magazine called Collier's exposed that Ballinger was secretly doing underhanded illegal dealings and selling Alaskan coal. One of the people to accuse Ballinger will be Pinchot, and he'll speak out publicly against it. Instead of taking Pinchot's side, Taft is going to fire Pinchot for speaking against Ballinger. This is going to make Taft look corrupt and that he doesn't support progressive reform. Also, he fired a personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt. Uh-oh. There's William Howard Taft. One of the famous stories about William Howard Taft is he had a special bathtub built for him. He actually got stuck in a bathtub as president. Oh, no. All right. So in the election of 1912, TR is going to try to take the Republican nomination from Taft. He's going to run as a Republican. The Republicans will decide to support Taft. So TR is going to decide to form his own party. It's going to be called the Progressive Party. Its nickname was the Bull Moose Party. That means, obviously, the Republican Party is going to be split between the Republicans, the Taftites, and the Rooseveltites. So in the election of 1912, you have the Bull Moose Party, the Progressives, versus the Donkey, the Democrats, and the Elephant, the Republicans. The Progressives will do really well in this one, but since the vote will split, the Democrats will win. TR is going to have a really strong agenda in the election of 1912. He doesn't win the election, so he never pushes for it, but it's called New Nationalism. And we'll talk about that in the next video. But the Democrat that runs in 1912, it's no longer it's no longer Williams, Jennings Bryan. It's going to be Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is a progressive Democrat, and he's going to run under his proposal of New Freedom. He wants to have stronger antitrust laws, banking reform, and lower tariffs. The triple walls of privilege. And in this election, because the Republican vote was split, Wilson's going to pretty handily win the election. All right, kiddos, that's all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces, yeah.